So there are only two sections remaining, and both these sections are very short, which I'm grateful for because, as some of you may have noticed, it's very late here, and I'm ashamed of that. But I'm hoping to get these done very shortly. So the subject we're going to touch on now is called indifference point, and I like to start this off with a quick example. So imagine you have two printers you could buy. You have a small little printer from Walmart that has a very small price and therefore very small fixed costs. And however, the price it takes to make each page is relatively high because it's very efficient. And then you have a very large printer, and the price is very high. It's at like $1,000. Therefore, the fixed costs are very high. However, the price to make each page, because it's very efficient, is very low. So if you wanted to make a 30-page report and you needed to buy a printer just to print out that report, which one would you buy? I bet almost everybody would choose the little one, because if you're only printing 30 pages, it doesn't matter if you're kind of inefficient in printing those pages, because the low fixed costs will make up for it. However, if you're perhaps in college and you need a new printer for your library, you would most likely want to choose this really big one, because you're likely going to be printing thousands of pages per week. So the whole question of indifference point is, okay, so what number of pages in between 30 and a few thousands does it not matter which printer you use? In other words, at what point of pages will the cost of each printer be exactly the same? And this can be graphed out mathematically like this. Say this y-axis represents the costs, and the x-axis represents the quantity of pages. Your cheap printer is going to have a small fixed cost at the beginning, so before you even make any pages, but because it's inefficient, it costs a lot per page, so that slope's going to be really high. However, your big printer is going to cost a lot, so it's going to start with a fixed cost at 0, really high, but it is really efficient, so its slope is really low. So this point in which they intersect is called the indifference point. And it's the point at which the quantity of pages means that the cost is exactly the same. So it doesn't matter which printer you use, because at this quantity, the cost will be exactly the same. Perfect. So the equations are relatively simple, and they're just kind of simple algebra that you have to solve for. So for indifference, if it asks you how many units is the indifference point, if you're only given costs, you simply need to write down this equation and solve for the underlying variable. So variable cost A times the quantity, which is the bolded variable. Sorry, I meant solve for the bolded variable, plus the fixed costs of A equals the variable cost of B times that quantity again, plus the fixed cost of B. And you just want to rearrange this. So subtract this, divide these, and so until you end up with Q equals a number. Great. So that's how you solve that. And then, so if it tells you this and asks for the indifference point again, but this time it says if given different prices, so if you can charge more for the more expensive printer paper because it prints it more efficiently and better pages, then you're going to include price. So in this case, you still solve for Q. So the price of A times Q, but this time you're going to subtract minus variable cost of A times Q minus fixed cost of A equals the same thing for B. Oh, sorry. This Q should be blue. Again, you're going to single out Q, so that Q equals so-and-so. Now, both of those were for indifference points, so indifferent point in units. Now, they may ask you the indifference revenue. So in other words, at what revenue does it not matter? So if people are offering you money for these pages, at what revenue does it not matter which printer you use? In this case, you would solve for revenue. So revenue times contribution margin percent of A minus fixed cost of A equals, and then same for B, and then eventually you'll just get revenue equals so-and-so. Perfect. Now on the exam, it's likely going to say, okay, so what's the indifference point? And you're going to find the indifference point, and then it's going to say, okay, now this is a number of pages you're going to print. Which printer should you buy? So a helpful tip so that you don't have to recalculate everything is if the number of units desired, so the number of pages you want to print, falls under the indifference point, use the product that has the least amount of fixed costs. So again, between that 30 pages and that thousands of pages, if it falls under that indifference point, you're going to want to go with the cheap small printer, the one with the least fixed costs, and vice versa. So if it's over that indifference point, you want to go with one with a higher fixed costs. And again, graphically, that's because of this. So if it's under that indifference point, then it would be cheaper to use the one with the smaller fixed costs. If it's over that indifference point, it would be cheaper to use the one with the higher fixed costs. So that's indifference point. Let's try a quick question with that.